Hi, this is Geoff Berry, and welcome to the Nature Calling channel, where we aim to deepen connection to the earth and to the spirit of life and to all our kin on this beautiful planet.
All right. Thanks very much for joining me on Nature Calling. Susie Russell, a bit of a legend of forest protection. Can you tell our listeners and watchers a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I live in northern New South Wales, west of Port Macquarie, in a little village, and I passed through the village about 32 or 3 years ago. Didn't really know anything about forests or what an old growth forest was, and some people here took me out to see these magnificent, huge old trees, like giant trees that took several people to wrap their arms around and said, "This is old growth." And I said, surely they're not still cutting this down. I mean, like in this day and age of 1992 or one or whatever it was. And so I felt called, I suppose, to try and do my bit to stop the logging of those old growth forests. And so with my partner, Greg, we came up here to sort of base ourselves, I suppose, while we looked for somewhere maybe in the Northern Rivers that we were settled.
So you hadn't been living there. You were just passing through. That place really got a hold of you, didn't it?
It certainly did. Yep, certainly did. It was, well, within a week, I think, of us arriving with our sort of gear, the Forestry Commission sort of closed the forest area. They brought in a 24-hour police presence. This was like 1993, I think. It's like 100 square kilometres of closed forest in order to log this old growth forest. And we had to walk for like 6 or 7 kilometres to get in there to even try and disrupt the logging. And that was the beginning. And so here we are now, unbelievably, 32 years later, I guess. And it's been a really long, difficult and sometimes joyous and crazy ride with so many adventures along the way. Met so many fabulous people who've been involved in trying to protect patches of forest. We have had some fantastic successes, like there are significantly more protected areas now than there were when I started.
Right.
And that has been brought about through a combination of direct action and processes and court cases, and the political process. So I've had to learn about all of those things, really, from...
Yeah. And I mean, look, I guess first of all, I want to just underscore the wins because we need to celebrate them. So thank you so much for making sure there's more old growth forest protected in northern New South Wales as well as beyond. And you mentioned, other people you've come to work with over the years. And of course, it's our mutual friend, John Seed, that put me in touch with you and said, you've got to find out about this lady and what she's doing and what she's done. And, in the end, unfortunately, if we didn't stand up, the machine would just strip the lot, right? It's actually people power that's managed to save what we're saving. I guess I'd love to hear, and I think people would love to hear what, apart from being in awe, which is what I got anyway of what you said about that first gigantic tree, what motivates you, what inspires you, what is it that got a hold of you beyond just the beauty of the magnificent old trees?
Well, I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in a little patch of bush. It was cleared dairy country 60 or so years ago, surrounded by nature. You might be able to hear the cicadas in the background.
That's it, yeah. I thought we had a bit of a nature soundtrack going on. So the cicadas are giving us some kind of rhythm in the background.
And when I sat out here earlier this morning, the lyrebird was so close, just running through its little call signature.
Right.
And it's just such for me, it's a journey about trying to get in touch with my own, I make my own nature connections that I am working on building, and to sort of keep me inspired. That thing of where when I'm depressed or angry, I go for a walk and some little bird or something happens and you see something and go, wow, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Or, there are things to laugh about, just the antics, particularly of birds, that can bring us back into that connection that as a society that we have lost. And I guess I see the most valuable thing that I can do is to try and make sure there are places where people can have those experiences. You don't need an old growth forest. Obviously, if you've got a magnificent, untouched, wild place, it's a lot easier to feel the awe.
Yeah.
But nature is all around us and open to us if we are open to her. So I guess that's what keeps me going, really. And the community of people who, as I said, I work with. I think doing these things on one's own would be too hard.
Yeah.
Just having, I've always found just having one other person who's catching your stories and listening to what happened today and what plans and ideas and bouncing off each other, that makes all the difference to being able to keep on going when the trees are falling, which is happening all the time, and it's happening now. And the forest near where I live, the Bulga forest, is currently being logged, and we've been working hard for a few years to try and stop that from happening. We've done, we've had politicians come and visit, we've had media stories about it, we've been out, we've had community citizen science camps. We've discovered that we have a nationally significant greater glider colony living in the area being logged.
Right on.
We've had a thermal drone come out and do some work to sort of pinpoint locations and trees that the gliders were using.
That's pretty incredible tech. So a drone can pick out from the thermals from a heat signature a glider population in tree hollows and things like that.
Well, it's not so good at getting them in the hollows, but after they come out and they're in the trees, it picks up the heat signature of the animal, and then it's able to zoom in and has an ordinary spotlight and a camera and can then take a photo so that you can show the proof that here is this animal in this location. And the area of forest that we're sort of trying to stop the logging, and that's an ongoing process and it will be for a bit, is there were 100 greater gliders and 14 koalas found in that patch of forest. So it's a really biologically rich, incredibly significant area, which both of those animals are on the endangered species list. They're both meant to get protection.
Yeah.
But logging is exempt. Logging by the state government's own logging company is exempt from those.
They get away with murder. When I first moved here to far south coast New South Wales, I just got in touch with everyone I could, and one of the environmental activists was a lawyer, and she said, "Look, we can go in after a logging, and we can find over 100 rules they've broken, and we can put them up as evidence, and they get like a slap on the wrist, and they're back again into the next coop, or the thing they call it, in no time." It really is. I mean, it stuns the imagination to think of what they're getting away with. And, and when you love the animals in the forest, it makes it so much worse. But I want to ask you, so where I live, we've got logging. The harbour at Eden has got ships coming in and out. I'm in a couple of groups where they talk about when the ships are coming and going and photos of them loading up. So that's still forest being cut down too. But the developmental pressure, the housing pressure around here means we've got gang. We've got a significant little pocket of gang cockatoos. And so we're monitoring those, or a couple of locals pretty much permanently logging numbers of them and trying to stop the housing developments from same thing, just ripping in. They just don't care. But I'd like to find out more about your forest. So tell us a bit about the Bulga, where it is. We know now you've got greater gliders and koalas in it.
Yeah, we're 65 kilometres west of Port Macquarie on the mid-north coast.
Yep.
It's a forest that still has significant old growth elements. So it's got quite a lot of old trees with hollows. It has had some logging in the past, but there was, before the logging started, an intact canopy. That meant that it was shady and cool, and that greater gliders are quite slothful in their habits, and they would prefer to just move from tree to tree by sort of small jumps rather than the long glide, which they can do a really long glide, of course, but they have to have a pathway. And I think, this is what makes it so crazy about the government's rules about what they protect for greater gliders, is that obviously gliders have to have a pathway, a glide path that gets them to where they want to go, but also gets them back. And to do that, you have to have tall trees at sufficient height. Like a glider can't glide upwards; it can only glide down. And so, what we've found in the last few weeks, doing some spotlighting, that we've found some patches of forest that have good hollows, and we thought, oh, well, this looks like a good place for gliders, but there aren't any gliders in that area. And looking around in the daylight, it's clear that one of the reasons is because there is no pathway to get back to those trees once they've left. There are no sort of trees higher that they can glide to. So there are whole areas of forest that are being made impossible for gliders to live in, lots of little patches. And the thing about greater gliders is they need unfragmented forest, continuous canopy. They don't like the heat. So climate change is driving them to the high country anyway. But once the shade has disappeared, because so many trees have been removed, it also gets too hot. So it means that once the logging takes out those elements, that greater gliders can't persist in that landscape. And so the area of the Bulga didn't burn in 2019. So most of the fires, much of the forest around here did burn, some of it quite severely, but the Bulga forest was relatively unscathed. It had some light areas of fire, but nothing as serious as a lot of other places. And so it was, we sort of started looking for koalas originally, thinking, well, did the koalas survive the fires? And we found quite a lot of koala scats, and it was like, well, this looks like there are some koalas in here, which was fantastic. And then we went out spotlighting really to look for koalas and discovered there were just so many greater gliders. And that was incredibly special and very exciting. And we've been taking regular spotlighting trips for the last year and a half. And we've had that amazing experience of when you pile a group of kids into the back of a ute and travel slowly down the road with spotlights, and then they see one, and the sort of screams of delight, I think, are something that's memorable, where they're just so excited. We've made some little badges, I saw a greater glider.
That's fantastic. And really, I think that's the roots of environmental activism. People, I got into a conversation recently and someone said, oh, what do you do to educate your kids about, about the environment, about climate change? And I said, I just keep them in nature as often as possible, because they're going to find out how bad the situation is at a planetary scale. I don't need to tell them that. They're getting that by osmosis anyway. Keeping them excited about nature makes them want to protect it. You're doing a great thing doing that.
Yeah, so that's been that's been great, and we've we've been doing that. So it was very devastating when at the beginning of October, the Forestry Corporation put up a locked gate as if to say, you know, here's the barrier, you know, this forest is closed now, you're not allowed to come in here. You know, if you come in here, then you'll be subject to arrest. Brought in the heavy equipment to the big, what they call a harvester, which is really a sort of a tree killing machine, can cut down a tree in about a minute. So it's just this incredible machine with a big claw on it, grabs the tree, cuts it off, lies it down, strips the bark off, moves it around.
No way.
Devastation in just a short period of time is truly shocking. And of course, it needs a lot of working area. So it's not like it just goes in to pick out this tree or pick out that tree. It needs to clear a big area for it to be able to work on. And of course, it's, I don't know, I think someone said it was like 50-ton machine. So it compresses the ground, its big caterpillar tracks churn up the earth. So our little community, and there's a little village nearby called Elands, we have been throwing ourselves at the machine because we are at the point where we have tried everything. We've tried lobbying, we've tried writing letters, we've tried all those things. And so now we are physically trying to slow down the machine.
So tell us about that. What does that actually involve?
Well, it involves getting up very, very early in the morning and walking through the bush in the dark, sometimes in the wet and the mud, to get to the machine, and then using a couple of bicycle D-locks, one attached to the machine and the other around one's throat, neck, to and sit on a chair. It's not as uncomfortable or horrible as
it sounds uncomfortable.
Well, you know, it just means you hopefully you get to sit there for a long time. I mean, that's the idea, is that basically, you know, they arrive for work and there's somebody sitting there attached to the machine. I think we've managed to do that 8 or 9 times during October. So then it's a matter of, it's a bit of a sort of a set piece that the Forestry Corporation reads you're contravening them, blah, blah, blah. And then the police come with the police rescue unit, who then very professionally use an angle grinder to cut the locks and then take you in the little dog box, which is the plastic box on the back of the police wagon, to it was about an hour and a half, I think, down a very bumpy dirt road. You've got nothing to hold on to. You're just in this sort of plastic box with no suspension underneath.
Wow.
I think the ride in the police wagon was probably the worst part of the experience.
Yeah, it sounds worse than the experience.
Yeah.
Can I ask, just that interests me. That seems very disrespectful. How do the police treat you? How do the forestry treat you? I guess to them, you're just a problem in the way of their business.
That's right. And they've all been told to not engage, so they don't stand around and chat. They come down, they tell you what they have to do, and then they go away. And I think that's because they have, recently there were a couple of interactions between conservationists and logging crews where the logging crews were incredibly abusive. Right. And it was filmed, and it didn't do them any good, of course. And so I think they've been told to stay well away, because we do try and make sure. I mean, when I was locked on, I had a little phone camera so that I could take photos if need be, or so you've got sort of something so they can film you, but you can film them as well, which is a sort of a little bit of protection, as long as you can keep hold of your phone. And the police similarly. I mean, the police have been largely respectful, although they have been quite ridiculous sometimes about trying to frighten and bully people about, this, how dangerous this is. This machine could roll on top of you, and it's like, it doesn't have wheels,
Yeah.
not actually going to roll anywhere,
Right.
but they try on all those kinds of arguments to try and
Yeah.
get people to um, feel vulnerable and afraid and insecure,
Yeah.
sometimes with more success than others.
On
Uh,
that on that point, I want to ask you about that because at a bigger picture level, the laws are becoming almost draconian about how they treat environmental activists. So I'm guessing the end of this story is it's locked on, cut off effectively, put in the dog box. You're getting arrested out of this, right?
that's right. That's right. I mean, what happened to me was pretty well. It was atypical, really. I was taken to the Taree police station, which is the nearest police station. I mean, everything gets taken off you. Your watch, your jewelry, your phone, your backpack, anything with a lace in it. That like if you had shoelaces or my hoodie had a lace around it to tighten it up. All those things get taken off you in case you decide that you're going to kill yourself while in custody. And then you sit in like a little glass box about the size of a telephone box. If people can remember what a telephone box looks
Yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, Sort of a bit like the TARDIS, or with a glass front, and wait for them to process you, which usually takes 3 or 4 hours. It's not a quick process by the time they've typed up everything that they think happened. And with me, they decided that they were going to put extra charges. So a couple of people had already done this before I had my turn, and they wanted to give me extra charges to make it that much more serious. So they put on a couple of charges about entering into enclosed lands, which are quite serious charges, very different to the forestry regulations. So everyone else has been charged under the forestry regulations, and the enclosed lands charges actually carry a jail term. And so they said to me, you're being charged with these various serious offences, so we're refusing you bail. Yep. So you have to stay overnight in the police cell and go and see the magistrate in the morning.
Mm.
So
So you're a persistent problem now, Susie. You get special rules.
special
Enough for you.
That's right. It was like, if we make an example of her, then maybe that will stop it, and everybody will stop. And
yeah.
So I had the joyful experience of still sitting in the police cell at midday the following day, when two of my friends were brought in, having locked on the following morning, um, and gone through the same situation as I had. So I was still in the process of getting out, having been before the magistrate. So it wasn't a deterrent. That they vote for, and we have legal advice that says that those charges won't stick, that the lands aren't.
Okay, that's great.
So obviously we have to have that fight in court, but the lands are very clearly for that act to apply. The lands need to be sort of fenced in or have some kind of natural boundary, and this clearly doesn't. It's just a forest that you can walk in from any of.
Right. Sure. Okay. Right. So their tactic falls over, but I guess what we're seeing is that ramping up, the tightening up. People power persisting though. So I love to hear more about that. So you've talked a bit about, working with other people, about community. You mentioned citizen science. So we've got the lock on, the put yourself in front of the machines. And I guess that's kind of relevant around here. So we had a recent extension of a development, which I walked past one morning and saw the bulldozers coming in through a part of it that had been signed for land care. and I'm afraid I might have lost. I lost my temper and I lost my patience and jumped onto the bulldozer and stopped it. And I said, "This is land care, man. You are not cutting this down." And you know what came out of that? This is why I asked you about how you got treated. What I felt was quite obvious. They had to stop. You know, there's an idiot on the machine. But that's actually how they felt about it. You could tell they were just like, "Okay, mate, well, we're just going to move over there 500 meters away and keep working on that bit of the forest until you clear out." They involved the police. The police didn't really arrest me or do anything. They were just like, "Tut, tut, tut." But it was, it was a moment of passion that had no great outcome. They still came back and finished the job, and we went to the council and all the stuff about the paperwork and when it was mandated as land care and all that stuff. But what's happening with this new area with the gang is someone much smarter than me and more patient like yourself and more professional about it is going about the citizen science thing. Where is the nests? These are protected. You can't keep doing this. And the writing up. So how do you go about, getting enough people involved on your citizen science type projects? Where do you get people with drones that help you out with this stuff? And then do you go through a legal process, write to politicians? How's all that stuff work up there at the Bulga?
Well, you got to remember that it hasn't worked.
Yeah, cool.
It hasn't stopped them.
Oh, you mean it has? Did you say it hasn't worked?
No, it hasn't. Like, we've gathered all of the data, to show that this is a really rich area, so important. One of the most important areas for greater gliders that we know of since the fires. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of work done to find out where the gliders are hanging on, but this is in the top half dozen of areas in the northeast where gliders are hanging on.
For an amazing animal.
And but that hasn't stopped the logging. So we've been lucky enough to have, like I say, we've got a very enthusiastic and committed local community. Very small little village, but nonetheless, so many people keen to go out, see the gliders, sit in front of a tree for a couple of hours and see if a glider pops out of a hollow, because the only way to get an area protected is to see a glider come out of a hollow. So otherwise they get nothing.
Yeah. So evidence that they are there, it's not enough. It's almost like they have to get the capture. They have to see the shot. There is a glider in that tree.
Yeah, in the hollow, coming out of the hollow. The glider in the tree doesn't get it.
Because he could have just been cruising by. That's not enough evidence. Right.
No, you've got to actually see it come out of the tree hollow.
Yep.
Forestry are very reluctant to accept our say-so about those records, but at the moment the rules are that if they are lodged properly with all the relevant information with the state government wildlife atlas, Bionet, then those records have to be respected by them.
So you've really had to learn your way around the system there, haven't you?
Well, we have people with different skills. So like in any community, we have the scientist who's very good at writing up the reports, the computer people who are great at finding their way around the mapping programs, the people who are great in the field, getting out there into difficult terrain and spotting gliders just at that moment that they're coming out of their den.
Right, because you're waiting for the moment. Yeah.
It's they come out just after dusk, and once they're out, they don't really go back into their den again all night. So you only get a small window to be able to look for them, and of course this is something that the government, the Forestry Corporation, is meant to be doing. They're meant to be going out and looking for greater glider den trees.
Do your own monitoring. Oh, can you imagine that?
Yeah, and their record is absolutely abysmal. Like, they survey a tiny fraction of the area. They find a tiny fraction of the den trees and see a tiny fraction of the gliders. And so most of the area gets no protection. Most of the gliders get no protection.
So in that small part they've monitored, if they see a tree and the glider, I mean, you're getting down to 1%ers already, and a glider leaving a hollow, do they mark that individual tree and say, okay, we'll leave that tree and cut around it?
Yeah, they have to. If they see a glider coming out of a tree, they have to give it a 50-meter logging exclusion zone.
You go, mate, you've got as far as I can kick a footy.
Yeah.
That's your new habitat.
Well, the thing is, greater gliders have a small home range. Like they have about 3 hectares, which if they had a 100-meter circle around that tree, would encompass a lot of the glider's home range.
Is that right? Okay.
Which makes them one of the easiest species to protect, because if you put 100 meters around every greater glider sighting, not just the den trees, you go a long way to protecting a lot of their habitat.
Yeah.
And we've pointed that out to the Environment Protection Authority, whose job it is to regulate forestry, and they say, oh, we can't do that because that would have an impact on timber. And we're not allowed to bring in rules that would have an impact on timber. So you've got the Environment Protection Authority basically saying we can't do our job because we're not allowed to do anything to protect the threatened species and endangered species if it's going to impact on wood supply. And obviously, I mean, every tree that
that's Kafkaesque.
Yeah, that's right. We're just going round and round. And so the trees fall and the gliders lose their homes, and they can't just move somewhere else. Gliders have the work done by Professor David Lindenmayer, who's the leading expert in the world on greater gliders.
Yeah.
Says that greater gliders, when their habitat is destroyed, they tend to stay as long as they can in their den, and that's where they die. They die in that patch of forest. They don't sort of head off into the wilds. And of course, part of what happens with the logging is there is nowhere to go because the connectivity, the connectivity is gone. They can't just go off through the forest because the trees that connect them to the forest are gone.
And you brought up an amazing point earlier about the fact that they need a higher tree to glide down and around. It's just another reason that old growth forests are so precious. Like, the one you learn pretty quickly is only old trees have hollows. So this whole idea of like, it's okay, we'll plant more trees than we cut down really doesn't help. And now B, as you say, you actually need the really old ones in order for them to be able to make their circuit.
That's right. I often hear people say, but look out there. There's millions of trees. There's trees as far as the eye can see. And it's like, yeah, they're babies. They're young. They're juveniles. They're not even adults, most of them.
What's an adult tree for you when you're talking in this language? What sort of age becomes old growth, for instance?
Well, I think, a mature tree, you're talking about a tree that's probably around 50, 60 years old. And you're starting to get into old growth when it's 120, 130 years old. Hollows don't usually start to form until a tree is about 120 years old.
There you go.
And they are small hollows, which are important for so many different types of birds and bats and reptiles. But the larger hollows don't form until a tree is much older. So if you're looking for a hollow that's going to be home for an owl, like the powerful owl, the tree might have to be 250 years old before, when the branches fall off, the hole that is left that then has to be eaten out by termites. And, there's a whole process of how a hollow forms. And that can take easily a couple of 100 years to get that size hollow. So,
and your greater glider is big, powerful owl, about the similar size.
Well, the greater glider is probably, you're looking at trees that are sort of at least 150 years old or more that are going to be able to home a greater glider. And the other thing is that the greater glider is actually the main food source of the powerful owl.
Ah.
So if you think about a powerful owl needing to eat a couple of greater gliders a week, that's that's 700. What is it? 52. It's 100 greater gliders 1 hour in a year. So if you think, well, we need to have, and it's not just the powerful owl, the sooty owl, the masked owl, the big forest owls that we have here. A lot of them depend on these other animals to be able.
Marsupials.
Yeah. So there's a whole chain of life, and the greater glider is a really important part of it.
Yeah, the ecosystem you explained too, you know, the fact that you need the termites to eat out the whole after the branch has fallen off the tree, like, and the time scales, like all of this has to be to happen. You know, before we started recording, we were both like, oh, too busy. If only we have more time to take a breather. Nature wants you to take a breather, right? It all takes time. We've got to leave these forests for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, they are actually living systems that are many, many thousands of years old. Like they have been developing over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. The animals that have evolved to live in them, been around for millions of years.
Yeah.
And in the blink of an eye, really, their whole existence is now at stake. But their evolutionary story is a lot longer than ours, and the sort of evolution of Australian wildlife is so unique, of course, because we were cut off from the rest of the Gondwanan continent, supercontinent, and it's really very sobering to think that some of these animals now don't have a trajectory into the future to last, more than a few decades. And the New South Wales government commissioned a review of the Biodiversity Conservation Act by Dr. Ken Henry, who is he used to be the head of the Treasury, but, he's someone who's a sort of eminent person. And that report found that of the more than 1,000 animals and plants that are on the endangered species list in New South Wales, the threatened species list, more than 50% of them were unlikely to survive the next 100 years. So we have so many plants and animals now that are really only decades away from blinking out on the planet forever.
Yeah.
And of course, they all are components of a web of life that supports us. I mean, we all, there's a lot of other things that are supported. We tend to put ourselves in the centre, but
yeah, we do.
But all those components are part of something that supports us, and as each of those strands gets cut of that web, then our existence as an animal species on this planet becomes more and more tenuous, and as we have disregard for their ongoing existence, it sort of doesn't bode well for our ability as a species to continue on for millennia, for sure.
I would agree. Yeah, I think that's clear. And, like James Lovelock showed when he was working out his Gaia hypothesis, complex systems are stronger. Like if you have a monoculture, one thing can wipe it out. You need complex systems to have adaptability and resilience. Things come in, things move out, things eat other things. There's a lot going on, and so there's checks and balances. Boy, oh boy, wouldn't it be good if we could just explain to the powers that be that this is now an existential threat. And as you said, all right, we tend to put the humans first at a certain level. I mean, I don't love that, but at a certain level we have to, right? Because if we don't talk to humans about saving the planet, we're not going to do any good at all. But you know, in the end, it is actually about reciprocity and the beauty of complexity. It is actually about keeping systems that might not have any other use to us, right? It doesn't have to be about farming and coal and all that stuff. It's just important for complexity in biodiversity to be maintained. It's actually real existential stuff.
Well, that's right. And I think that we don't, I mean, we know so little about how the complexities interweave.
Mm.
And we find now that, for example, that there are fungi that can change the world in many ways, you know, that serve they can eat um, pollution and sort of digest it and convert it into elements that are not so harmful.
Yeah.
You know, they're powerful medicines. I mean, there's all sorts of medicines coming out of bacteria and plants and things that are life saving for
Yeah.
many people.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
so much. But if we that comes from that complexity and exploring it and nurturing it and respecting it is really fundamental to a good life for, you know, for our species.
Nice. That's a beautiful way to tie it back together. So just one thing more I'd love you to speak to then is how we empower people through this kind of work, through connecting to nature and the citizen science, you know, well, citizen science just being keeping our eyes open to try and log, you know, pieces of information and stuff. How do you see collectives of people remaining empowered and remaining motivated to do this work, Susie?
Well, I think the really key thing is to find a group of people who you feel happy working with. I mean, there's bushwalking groups, there's land care groups, there are birdwatching groups. Some of them are online groups, online communities. I mean, there are thousands of Facebook groups now for identifying fungi or plants, or just engage in that process of looking at nature, thinking about it, finding the awe, I think, is really important. Like being prepared to be wide-eyed and to just sit and either looking at the macro or looking at the micro and realize that there's something there that is absolutely awesome about how life works, and rekindling that spirit inside ourselves of awe makes us want to then do something to protect it. And I mean, all those really boring things that writing letters and making phone calls and signing petitions, and they actually are an important part of the process. And we've been encouraging people to ring the Premier and the Environment Minister. And we know that for a while there, they were saying, oh, we've had so many phone calls about Bulga. And it helps get the name recognition. It helps you know that the politicians are starting to listen to what you have to say. It's that thing where repetition has to happen a lot before they go, oh yeah, Bulga, oh yeah, I heard about that. What was it about that place?
Yeah, it's not just a couple of crazy tree huggers. People are talking about it now.
That's it. So just trying all those things, writing about it, sharing the Facebook, Instagram, and all those things. Getting out there, like doing some online research, but going out into the field and just jotting down the birds you see. There's I think one of the BirdLife Australia has an annual tally the birds in your backyard, you know, learning the birds.
Yeah, they just did it. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's a similar process for frogs and platypus, and just participating in those things. If there's kids in your life, getting them to think about it as well. Right. And of course, if there is a group near you that's engaged in active forest defence, then finding out how you can help. I mean, sometimes it's just standing on the road with a banner, but that's important. That helps that helps the logging community see, well, actually, it's not just the person down there in the forest on their own. There are all these other people standing by the side of the road who are holding signs supporting them. Or we had someone come to our community centre last night and cook a meal for everyone, and said, I can't do anything else, but I can cook, and I'm going to come regularly and cook you guys a meal because what you're doing is awesome. Right. And I mean, that's just a fabulous all-round feel-good thing. So that's, there are so many ways, but being prepared to act, to not just be passive and not just sort of consume whatever's being fed to us, but to take an active step, to get involved and to communicate your support and send a message of support to the local group that are standing on the front line, and have a little fundraiser for them, or all those little things add up to being really quite significant. And you never know where the ripples go. That's the other thing, is that might do some little thing and somebody comes and they know someone and on it goes, and it can have a really big impact. So every little thing is from little things, as they say.
From little things, big things grow. So every little thing, all the different parts of loving nature, as you said. I love that idea. You bushwalkers, you bird watchers, you can recruit energy, you can bring people in online to the same aim, protecting forest. Awe and wonder and love. I love that you brought that in, but also, being prepared to either get uncomfortable, whether it be with a D lock around your neck or in a dog box on the back of a divvy van, or help those who are prepared to be uncomfortable. That's what else I'm getting out of you here. Not everyone has to go front line, right? You can still be a part of trying to help protect forests.
Yeah, absolutely. Make signs. Have a little table in the middle of town and tell people about it. And there are so many things that can be done.
Someone near here, every time you drive up towards Bateman's Bay, up around a corner on the hill, I don't know how they got up there, as a fair effort. Halfway up a spotted gum tree is a little sign. Someone's just tacked up to the tree or tied around it that says, "Help me save you." It's so beautiful and perfect, and you can't really miss it. It's amazing. And I just think, anyone with a little bit of openness to that kind of message is going to see that every day or every week or however they do that drive. And those things add up too, like just the message, as you said, don't just accept what we consume. I mean, partly that's everyone just going down the mall, or, I was horrified. I was looking for some decking and everyone was telling me to buy this, I can't remember, Meerbau or something. And I looked it up and it was like, that's a rainforest tree from Indonesia that's probably going to go extinct in the next 10 years because everyone's figured out it's really good for decking. Like, what are you doing selling that stuff to us? But it's also the story. The story they're selling us is shut up and keep consuming. And we can't be accepting that story.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're not trained to ask where things come from. Like, how did they get to us? And if we were, I think, for many of the goods we consume, we'd be horrified. And then we have the process of don't think about where it goes when you throw it away.
Yeah.
It's just away. Yeah. And of course, there's a whole other story there about what happens to things when we sort of are finished with them. And so part of standing up for nature is thinking about where things come from, where they go to, and do I really need them at all?
Yeah, where do I fit in that story? Awesome. Thanks, Susie. I love it. I've been really inspired to hear you speak and to draw a lot of stuff together on behalf of, the forest. I think koalas became a really big story, not even after the fires, even, just in the last 10 years or so. I think a lot of people have been really shocked by the fact this iconic, beautiful Australian marsupial is actually becoming endangered. But to listen to you also, it brings back the other animals, the gliders, the owls, the trees, again, just the beauty of these places, which were cared for by Aboriginal people pretty well for a pretty long time. Comparatively, as you say, it's happening fast. So you definitely, I hope that a lot of people that are watching or listening to this will be able to take whatever small step they can to move in that same direction. I'm sure it will be an inspirational story for them.
Great. Thanks. It's been really good to chat.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Susie.
Okay. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching, and please consider liking this video. And if you want more content like this, subscribe, and the nature calling bell will toll for you. This is Geoff signing off.